y buenas tardes. Bom dia e boa tarde. Bonjour. There is an interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Hay un botón de interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Existe un botón de interpretación en la parte inferior de tela. Il y a un bouton d'interprétation en bas de votre écran. Ambassadors for Peace, welcome. I'm Franco Famularo, Canadian President of Universal Peace Federation, or UPF for short, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this International Summit Council for World Peace session entitled The Influence of the Americas and the Peaceful Reunification of the Korean Peninsula. This is one in a series of global webinars sponsored by UPF that will examine constructive scenarios from the perspective of the Americas in the quest for a peaceful resolution in the Korean Peninsula. The Korean War, as you know, began in 1950, over 70 years ago. The war concluded not with a peace treaty, but with an armistice leaving the once unified Korean Peninsula divided. The initiative of UPF in the Americas is dedicated to the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. With this in mind, UPF organizes a variety of programs that bring together leading experts from a wide variety of professional fields to explore the prospects for peace and improved relations, not only between the two Koreas, but among the other stakeholder countries. The main goal of this soft power or track 2 approach to peace is to contribute to the peaceful reunification through dialogue, scholarly research, and civil society initiatives that build personal connections. Political, military, and economic factors are considered. Civil society initiatives include conferences, humanitarian projects, and various forms of people-to-people engagement. Over the next 2 years, UPF will carry out a very ambitious slate of programs and projects for peaceful reunification, working through its primary associations, such as this one. Today, we have a distinguished panel, and each speaker will share their remarks first, and as time permits, the panelists will engage in discussion and answer questions. We have with us the Right Honorable Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada from 2006 to 2015, Ambassador Joseph Detrani, Special Envoy to the Six Party Talks on Korea for the United States, and the Honorable John Fonseca, Vice Minister of Foreign Trade of Costa Rica. We also have Dr. Charles Young, who serves as regional chair for Central America and the Caribbean, and Dr. Michael Jenkins, President of UPF International and Regional Chair for North America, who will be first to speak. Dr. Jenkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Famularo, and greetings to our distinguished panel and to all of our heads of state, parliamentarians, experts on diplomacy and peace. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program, the International Summit Council for Peace, focusing on the influence of the Americas on the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. The International Summit Council for Peace that is featured here today, it now has over 120 current and former heads of state and government from every continent who are collaborating with UPF to address peaceful solutions to the world's troubled areas. Today, we are looking at how to bring peace in the Korean Peninsula. Nearly 71 years ago, the Korean War broke out. 16 nations sent troops, including Colombia, Canada, and the United States, to join the UN forces. 5 nations gave direct support with medical and other supplies, and many, many nations from the Americas also supported. We can never forget the sacrifices made there, and we now understand that that war was not only for the nation of Korea, but as a war between God-fearing democracies and the threat of God-denying global communism. If the Korean War was lost, the advance of communism would have been rapid and perhaps unstoppable. Still today, there is no peace treaty between the US and North Korea. The tensions are rising again at this time, and there is an urgency on how we might reduce tensions and bring peace in that region. The International Leadership Conference, what we are part of today, is having 10 sessions on this topic with experts from every area of diplomacy and business, media, and also academia. And today we're very happy to engage heads of government and intelligence, and to also really look for how we can engage the 6 nations in that region of Northeast Asia. We're very honored also to have insights and leadership of Prime Minister Harper, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, former U.S. Vice Presidents Pence, Cheney, and Quayle, as well as extremely important leadership from South and Central America, President Jimmy Morales of Guatemala, His Excellency Mark Phillips, the current Prime Minister of Guyana, President Zamoros of Bolivia, President Ferdinand Franco of Uruguay, President Alaman of Nicaragua, President Carmona, Anthony Carmona of Trinidad and Tobago, and many, many more are involved. But they have been directly contributing to this effort. Along with heads of state, members of parliament, faith communities, business and academia, and even the arts are now joining together to form a new initiative that we'd like to introduce to you today. It's called Think Tank 2022. It's an expert working group that is collectively bringing their expertise together, their influence, their diplomacy, their experience, and their hearts to bring some kind of resolution or increase the possibilities of peace in troubled areas of the world. And again, right now we're focusing on Northeast Asia. We're also focusing on the Middle East and other areas where there's trouble. The Washington Times Foundation and the Washington Times, which supports and partners with UPF, has done a number of fact-finding trips to Korea, Japan, and throughout the world. Our trips to Korea with experts like Ambassador Joe Detrani, who is with us today, have opened many doors for further collaboration between the parliaments of our nations and the intelligence communities and leaders of all aspects of engagement. When the pandemic subsides, we will be hosting as soon as possible the Washington Times UPF fact-finding trips to South Korea, Japan, and hopefully to North Korea. Many of the key associates of UPF are from countries with diplomatic relations with North Korea. Delegations have already visited North Korea with very good outcomes. So UPF is a uniquely positioned NGO that can engage on many different levels. And it's not simply only one region of the world that we represent. We're representing all the constituencies of the world. We would like to see the Americas join together with a collective unity to bring that diplomacy further so it can be expanded until the free, democratic, God-fearing nations of the world can also have more direct engagement with North Korea, Russia, and China on a more peaceful and progressive way. We are hoping that many of you here will be able to join our Track 2 diplomatic missions to Northeast Asia, which will come up as soon as the pandemic is reduced. UPF now has over 1,100 fields collaborating on securing denuclearization of peace for the Korean Peninsula. What is unique to the Western Hemisphere? It is really something that Dr. Moon, our founder, and her late husband, Reverend Moon, really saw. They spent 40 years in South America, Central America, and North America. They saw this as a kind of a central axis for world peace and for the world, because these cultures here of the Americas are unique in that they're based on Christianity, Catholicism, and Protestantism together. Though all other parts of the world share this heritage, the fervor of faith in the Americas and the Caribbean is strong. And these traditions also embrace the right of all faith traditions. This makes the Americas uniquely suited to encourage religious freedom in Asia and the respect for all peoples of faith. Without religious freedom and faith, there cannot be peace in the family, nation, or world. Our co-founders, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon and her late husband, also were encouraging this cooperation so that the Americas could really change the dynamic of engagement worldwide, because there is an affinity between the Americas in terms of our cultural exchange. Our countries share the culture of one another so much. Trade between the nations of the Americas is approaching $2 trillion, which is a huge economic axis for the world. Also, the environment is of key concern. So we're not only working on peace from diplomatic or political positions, but also the diplomacy of food diplomacy and sharing the medicine that's needed, as North Korea is now being ravaged by the pandemic. It's finally been admitted that this is so. So we're engaging with our experts to bring that kind of humanitarian engagement, work with the UN to bring this about. By the way, UPF is a UN NGO with general status, general consultative status. So we have standing. So also the environment itself, the Pantanal and Amazon are considered the lungs of the earth. We have to protect our environment. And Dr. Moon, our founder, went with her husband there and spent many years in the Pantanals in Paraguay and the jungles around Fort Olimpo. It's really something. And the presidents and prime ministers from Latin America and the members of parliament have done much to support our work for UPF to bring unity and cooperation. Years ago, there was a huge challenge of the left, or I would say the communist ideology in South America, Central America, and the United States and Canada. The response to that was initiated was called causa, meaning the Latin word cause, or God, the first cause. That the only way to counter communism and God-denying communism is to bring the higher values of our biblical, faith traditions, and the acknowledgement that God is the author of peace, God is the creator, and therefore the principles of God, that you reap what you sow, that loving your enemy, that living for the sake of others. These are biblical, God-based principles. They're also universal principles for all faith traditions. And we want to see those principles also emphasized. And through those efforts, the Causa movement was able to successfully divert some of the efforts to take many of the countries in the Americas toward communism. And that effort has been very, very successful. And we're very grateful for that. So UPF is working on all levels to bring peace and unity, but always with the respect for all people that we're engaging. I want to thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins, for your insights and providing a global UPF perspective. It is my privilege now to introduce our next speaker, the Right Honorable Stephen Harper, who led Canada as the 22nd Prime Minister from 2006 to 2015 through some of the world's most complex geopolitical and security challenges. Mr. Harper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Greetings to my fellow panelists, to distinguished invitees from throughout the Americas, and to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to once again be joining the Universal Peace Federation for this International Leadership Conference. In fact, a series of conferences, I understand, being held in 3 different parts of the world, with, as we are accustomed to at UPF gatherings, a stellar cast of guests from many countries and all walks of life. All of us have now been through a year and a quarter of the pandemic brought on by COVID-19 and its variants. With vaccines now developed and distribution well underway, many of us can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I have to say that this light of hope has been shone by the Universal Peace Federation from the beginning. And not just from the beginning of this pandemic, but for many decades across many issues, and none as important to humanity as the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Korea stands at a critical position in the world. Next to it are 2 of Asia's great powers, China and Japan, and 2 other major global powers are just as close: Russia, which sits at the border of the north, and America, whose forces remained stationed in the south. So, as long as the present division and antagonism persist, peace in the world remains precarious. And yet, on the one side of the demilitarized zone, progress continues. In fact, it is spectacular. Even in the shadow of constant threat, the Republic of Korea in the south has become one of the world's most prosperous, most peaceful, and most progressive nations. Yet the DPRK in the north remains one of the world's most repressive, most recalcitrant, and most retrograde. In my time as Prime Minister, I had many opportunities to visit South Korea, to see its magnificent cities, to witness its innovative and cutting-edge industries, and to share the global stage with its respected leaders, with whom Canada was able to conclude a historic free trade agreement. But my fellow leaders and I knew the North only through eerie visits to the DMZ, the country on the other side of that, frozen in the 1950s during the day and draped in pitch black from lack of basic electricity during the night. That contrast has been evident once again during this pandemic. The South managing the virus with one of the lowest rates of infection in the world and with only a mild economic slowdown, but the North refusing to give out any real medical data and with an economy and society under total lockdown. And I really think that is where lies the challenge that has always faced Korea and this particular problem. For reconciliation and reunification are necessary, but there is nothing that South Korea can give up, and there is nothing that North Korea has to offer. And so patience must persist, and outreach between regular Korean people and civil society on both sides of the border must take place whenever it is possible, which of course is one of the great missions of this organization, the Universal Peace Federation, one of the things in which it is world leading. And in that regard, let me congratulate the UPF for your latest initiative, the inauguration of the International Association for a Unified Korea. As I understand it, this will be an expert working group and a think tank for 2022, which we all expect to be a year of new beginnings. Allow me also to reiterate my own advice on how to meet this challenge. I've spoken to you about this before, and in fairness, this advice is framed really for my friends in South Korea, and particularly as they deal with this at the level of international diplomacy and government-to-government communications. I would summarize my thoughts in 6 points. First, I think it is important for all of us to do genuinely desire peace in our hearts, but also to keep caution in our heads when dealing with the North Korean government. Second, we should always judge North Korea never by its words, but only by its actions. Third, bring both hopeful promises and credible threats to any table. Fourth, I think it is important to hold the People's Republic of China accountable for the survival and longevity of the brutal regime in Pyongyang that it supports. Fifth, do not trust any involvement by Vladimir Putin and his Russian Federation. I've seen that up close way too often. And sixth, I say stay close to your allies and friends, especially the United States of America, but also continue to seek reconciliation with the state of Japan. And remember that you, South Koreans, have many enduring friends throughout the world, including in my country, Canada, whose close relations with South Korea have grown out of trade, people-to-people ties, and the shared sacrifice of the Korean War. In regard to the Republic of Korea's alliances, let me just add that I'm delighted to see the growing importance of the D10. As I have long advocated, including before the UPF, I've long advocated that G7 embrace our friends, particularly in South Korea and Australia, but also India. Once again, I want to thank this organization, the Universal Peace Federation, for all that you do to reconcile the two Koreas, to reconcile people everywhere, and to reconcile humanity with God. And I note that the inauguration of the International Association for a Unified Korea is taking place at an auspicious moment, as today, as I understand, just one day following the 61st lunar wedding anniversary of your founders, Dr. Sung-Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon. We honor Dr. Moon for her ongoing commitment to this cause, as well as your senior leadership, Chairman Walsh, International President Jenkins, Canadian President Famularo, for all your critical work in pursuit of Dr. Moon's vision. Thank you once again for inviting me. I love these conferences. I look forward to the rest of the discussion. And I do hope that I'll see all of you one day in person in the not too distant future in Seoul. Merci beaucoup.
Muchas gracias, and thank you very much, Mr. Harper, for your comments. And I too look forward to hearing from you shortly in the question and answer session, but more than that, look forward to seeing you in person again. Next up is Ambassador Joseph Detrani, who has invested in negotiations with North Korea in different capacities for 13 years, and especially as United States Special Envoy to the six-party talks between 2003 and 2006, and also as Associate Director of National Intelligence, and also as a private citizen, as he is doing today. Mr. Detrani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco, Dr. Franco. It's an honor being here. And my thanks to UPF and the International Leadership Conference for having this session this morning and throughout these next 2 days. This is an important issue. As the Prime Minister said, this is something that has to be addressed and has to be resolved. And this is an issue that affects all countries. It's not only a regional issue, it's a global issue. And the US has been in the lead for a number of years on this issue, mainly because North Korea, starting with Kim Il-sung in 1994 and his conversations with Dr. Billy Graham, and then with President Jimmy Carter, indicated an interest in normalizing relations with the United States. So we have to keep that in perspective. This is something, it's not only with Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il, it was Kim Il-sung who's been seeking this normal relationship with the US. Therefore, the US has taken the lead at the request of North Korea on a lot of the negotiations. And I'll say this, Franco, you mentioned 13 of the last 20 years. Yes, I've been personally involved, and I can tell you this, dealing with some very senior officials in North Korea, whether it's in Beijing or in Pyongyang or somewhere else in Europe, they are committed to complete verifiable denuclearization. However, there's an imperative there, and that means security assurances. Assurances and a guarantee that regime change is not our objective, our being the international community, the United States, etc. It's a peaceful resolution. And this is something that we have been pursuing, and we've had some success in the past. It's a little discouraging when you read the media, hear the media, talking about 27 years of complete failure. Well, the fact of the matter is we have failed. North Korea has more nuclear weapons and missile delivery systems than certainly in 1994. However, starting in 1994, we've had success with the agreed framework, where they froze Yongbyon, where they dismantled the construction of a 50 megawatt and a 200 megawatt reactor that they've never reconstructed again. We've had some success with the six-party talks, with the joint statement of September 2005, where North Korea, with the leader, Kim Jong-il, committed to complete verifiable denuclearization, dismantling all nuclear weapons and weapons facilities. However, in exchange for what? Security assurances, a peace treaty that will lend itself to that trust and confidence. Also, economic development assistance, so that North Korea and the Prime Minister just mentioned the dire situation in North Korea as we speak now with COVID-19. Well, this has been going on in the late 90s. We've had significant starvation in North Korea. So there are economic imperatives there, but also a process that lent itself to normal relations with the United States and other countries, I might add. So although the US has been in the lead with those negotiations and with the summit in Singapore of June of 2018, when our former president, Donald Trump, sat down with Chairman Kim Jong-un and came up with a declaration, a very short, very concise, took a lot of criticism from, again, the international media and others, but it was very to the point. It was very, very powerful, and it spoke of transforming our relationship with North Korea, having a peace treaty to end the Korean War, talking about complete verifiable denuclearization and the repatriation of American and Allied troops who were lost in the Korean War. That was powerful. Unfortunately, Hanoi, subsequent to that, the Hanoi summit was a failure. It didn't produce something, but we have to remember with the Hanoi summit, Libya, the Libyan model, when we're asking North Korea to give up all its nuclear weapons initially, and then in return, we will lift sanctions and we will move with security assurances, economic development assistance. That's not going to work, ladies and gentlemen. We know this from the joint statement of September 2005. We spent 2 years working on that. It's actions for actions, commitments for commitments. As North Korea dismantles, they get the security assurances. As North Korea moves to dismantle all their nuclear weapons facilities, they also not only get that, but there's a peace treaty to end the Korean War. There's a process to normalize relations, liaison offices in our respective capitals. This builds trust. But again, economic development assistance, that's a very important part of the equation. And I can't emphasize that enough. You know, when I speak of that, I go back to 1944 in Bretton Woods, at the end of the Second World War, when the international community came together again after the war, the devastation of the war, and we created the International Monetary Fund. We created the World Bank to help these countries that were suffered so poorly, and the people needed so much assistance, to provide the economic incentive, the assistance necessary to rebuild these countries in a significant way. Well, you know, when I think of what's going on in North Korea, not only in the late 90s when there was significant starvation, but what's going on now as we speak, because of COVID-19 and some other economic imperatives and sanctions that are truly biting in North Korea. There's certainly a humanitarian issue involved here. Well, we have the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, and Canada plays a leadership role in this bank. There are over 100 member nations part of this bank. This would be part of the infusion of foreign direct investment, part of the economic development assistance, whether it's civilian energy assistance, whether it's building the infrastructure in North Korea, but it's also moving towards a peace treaty. And right now we can just have a declaration saying that is our intent. Let's end the Korean War. Let's move to a peace treaty. But indeed, let's give North Korea those security assurances, as we did in September 2005 with the joint statement, the negative security assurances, no intention to attack, invade, using conventional or nuclear weapons. They need these assurances. This is the lifeline. This is a deterrent for North Korea. And I've heard this for the 15 years I've been working with the North Koreans over the last 20 years at a very senior level. They can give up those nuclear weapons if they get those security assurances and they move towards economic development assistance and normalize and become a normal state. And that means the lifting of the sanctions. But again, actions for actions, commitments for commitments. So I'll end on this point. Economic development assistance for North Korea is not only a geopolitical imperative, because without a peaceful resolution to the North Korean nuclear issue, we will not see the peace and security in Northeast Asia that we all aspire to and that we all want. We will not move towards the reunification that we all want on the Korean Peninsula. And this means working closely with our allies, and certainly in the Republic of Korea and Japan, but also China and Russia. But all of us, the international community, coming together on these issues here. So there are things we need to do, but economic development assistance is important. It will be the beginning of movement towards, if you will, economic integration between North and South Korea, the rail lines, some of the other imperatives there that can facilitate movement towards possibly a confederation, which would then lend itself to, if you will, reunification of the Korean Peninsula, something we all want. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, this is all within our grasp. We've had 27 years of working this issue. And for those who say total failure for 27 years, yes, but conditional yes. We've had some success. And we've had a lot of contact with the North Koreans, to include our former president and President Moon Jae-in, and what South Korea has been doing to move in this area here. And we've seen that they do want to move with complete verifiable, but they do need these other elements, and indeed the security assurances. So I would submit with the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, we have an entity there that's sitting right there, headquarters in Beijing, that could provide that economic development assistance that would facilitate movement in a lot of these areas. We control this. We're in charge of a lot of these aspects to it. And certainly our allies in Canada are critical players with the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank. That is just one of the many tools we have available to us to move towards finally peacefully resolving all issues with North Korea so that we can see the prospects of eventual reunification with the Republic of Korea and a united, if you will, Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Very much, Mr. Dutrani. Your experience in this area is tremendous and truly hands-on as you've dealt directly with North Korea, and we look forward to hearing more from you shortly. Our next speaker is the Honorable John Fonseca, who served as Vice Minister of Foreign Trade for Costa Rica and as President of the Trade Facilitation National Council. He served as Chief Negotiator of Free Trade Agreements. He also studied in Canada, and so it is my pleasure to welcome Honorable Fonseca. The floor is yours.
First, I would like to thank to the UPF family for giving me another space to share with you some of my thoughts regarding this wonderful and beautiful vision of a reunified Korea. I like the stories. I believe that stories can tell us a lot, and we can learn a lot from stories. And so I would like to share with you a couple of anecdotes that I believe can support my message. A few years ago, when I was leading the negotiation of the free trade agreement between South Korea and Central America, I had the possibility to visit the demilitarized zone in the border between the Koreas. During that visit, our guide, almost crying, was trying to explain us the conflict and the situation that have been there for more than 70 years. But for a person like me, coming from a country with no army and not knowing what it's like to touch a firearm, it was very hard to understand the suffering and uncertainty caused for a conflict that have been there for more than 70 years. I'm sorry, Eliezer, creo que voy a iniciar porque cometí varios errores. Entonces, si te parece, voy a iniciar y después lo editamos. Voy a hacer cuenta regresiva de 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. First, I would like to thank to the UPF family for giving me another space to share with you some of my thoughts regarding this wonderful and beautiful vision of a reunified Korea. I like stories. I think we can learn a lot from stories. So I would like to share with you some anecdotes that I believe can support my message. A few years ago, when I was leading the negotiation of the free trade agreement between South Korea and Central America, I had the possibility to visit the demilitarized zone in the border between the Koreas. During that visit, our guide, almost crying, tried to explain the situation that have been there for more than 70 years. But for a person like me, coming from a country without an army and not knowing what it's like to touch a firearm, it was very hard to understand the suffering and uncertainty caused for a conflict that is so far in the past. I think probably it was almost as hard as it was for our guide to imagine and to understand a country without an army. It was not until that moment that I truly understood the phrase of a former ambassador of Japan in our country, Ryoichi Sasakawa, who said, "Dichosa la madre costarricense que sabe que su hijo al nacer jamás será soldado," which means, blessed is the Costa Rican mother who knows that her son at birth will never be a soldier. There were a lot of silence and thoughtful faces in our way back to Seoul. For good or bad, our reality today is very linked to the decision someone did many years ago. Some days after that visit, I had a dinner with the head negotiator of Korea. I was telling him that we needed to include a chapter of cooperation in the free trade agreement, trying to put in place a mechanism where we could learn from Korea their outstanding practices in technology and innovation. My surprise were that he was very enthusiastic with the proposal and told me, "This is great. We have a lot to learn from you." I was very confused. So I asked him, "I'm sorry, my friend. I know that we can learn a lot from you, but I'm not sure where is the balance. In which areas do you think you can learn from us?" And he told me, "You are always in the top ranked countries in the happiness index. We can share with you about technology and innovation, and you can share with us about happiness." At that point, I was already very impressed with the Korean values and principles. But that humility and clarity of what they were looking to achieve just made me realize how amazing these people is. And definitely a very smart people. When we were trying to implement, I realized that it was easier to share in how to do innovation and technology than how to achieve happiness. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle said, "Happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence." And probably that is why there is a lot of people trying to find that formula. My view is that there is no recipe. There are as many variables as differences between people and nations to pretend that one fits all. So I have to excuse myself. I don't have, so I can share with you the secret of happiness. But I can do what I can do is and hoping that it may be useful in the route of reunify and better Korea for all. It's to share with you some of the key elements of what I believe should be our aspiration as a country, the construction of a well-being economy. To understand what a good society is and how it can be pursued, that's a very hard question to answer. Today, more than ever, we need to redefine the concept of development. People inclusion and sustainability needs to be in the center of every conversation. How can we deliver quality of life and flourishing for all people, assuring sustainability for the planet and our future generations should be the question. Key words that come from that dialogue usually are personal well-being. And when we are talking about personal well-being, the key words are happiness, subjective well-being, life satisfaction, wellness, prosperity, quality of life. But definitely the personal well-being is very linked to community well-being. And in the community well-being, we need to talk about social capital, treating places, neighborliness, social cohesion, pro-social behaviors. And those two needs to be linked to societal well-being. And when we're talking about societal well-being, definitely we will need to talk about social progress, sustainable development, human development, well-being economy. The personal pursuit of happiness should never come at the cost to the happiness of others. Thus, community well-being entails more than just the sum of the personal well-being of the people who live in a particular geographical area. Good relationships between individuals and groups are the core of community well-being. To close the negotiation, there were a request that Korea never left behind and told us that if that was not included in the FTA, sadly, they were not going to be able to sign the agreement. They wanted to include the goods produced in a free zone in North Korea that employ at that moment more than 10,000 people from that nation. And they wanted us to accept that as part of the free trade agreement and to consider if they were coming from South Korea. As you can imagine, that were a very hard thing to do. That's in a free trade agreement between two regions or two nations to include a different one or products coming from a different one, that's almost impossible. So often during the negotiation, we arrived to a dead end. And when we arrived to that situation, usually we used a phrase: let's look for the light, not for the heat. And well, here we are. We did it. We signed it and the agreement is in place already. Those experiences show me that most of the time our reality comes from the past. Once we learn, it's very hard to unlearn and to do things in a different way. I always say to my boy that he should be very careful of the rear view effect. It's okay to look back time to time, but if he does not look at front, at some point, he will crash and not going to get to the place he's looking to his destiny. Trying to change the past literally has no future. There is nothing we can do for the past. There is a lot we can do for the present and for the future. So I encourage him to learn from the past, but to put his energy in the present to build a better future. Those experiences teach me that with the right attitude, we can always learn from each other and build a better condition for all. Those experiences show me that the love between the people of these two nations is there. They are family. And that's all they need to fix what needs to be fixed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable John Fonseca. I'm very sorry that the internet connection wasn't as good as it could be, but I'm sure that we can essentially grasp the essence of what you said, and I look forward to more of your commentary during the question and answer session. Well, we now move to our last speaker, Dr. Charles Young, who was born in Korea and is currently in Korea and serves as the Central America and Caribbean Regional Chair of the Universal Peace Federation. He previously served as International and North American Chair of the Family Federation, a sister organization of UPF. Dr. Young, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors for Peace, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Greetings from Korea. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome our distinguished panelists on behalf of UPF International. We sincerely thank you for attending this conference despite your busy schedules. For decades, UPF have been leading peace initiatives through holding conferences, and fact-finding tours such as the Middle East Peace Initiative and the Balkan Peace Initiative. Today, our session focused on Korean Peninsula, the most serious hotspot for world peace. UPF has been dealing with this as a part of the Northeast Asia Peace and Security Initiative for several years. Actually, co-founders of UPF, Father and Mother Moon, both were born in North Korea and came to South Korea as refugees, where they started the peace initiative from the ruin of war. Eventually, they met with the key figures of communism, former President Gorbachev of the Soviet Union and Kim Il-sung of North Korea in 1990 and 1991. A week ago, UPF Korea had a conference to commemorate the 30th anniversary of those historical meetings. As a Korean, I personally have great interest in solving the crisis in my homeland. I led the student movement during 1980s and 90s, the most crucial time in the campus to deal with the conflicts. And I have visited North Korea and discussed with North Korean key leaders. Historically, the Korean Peninsula is located in the midst of geopolitical conflict between the four major powers, China, Russia, Japan, and USA. I wanted to address the cause of division of North and South Korea due to an agreement between USA and the Soviet Union before end of World War II in 1945. Korean Peninsula was occupied by Imperial Japan from 1910 to 1945 for 36 years. At the end of World War II, the Soviet Union promised to join its allies in the Pacific War, but never joined until the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Japan. Finally, the USSR declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria on 8th of August, 1945, 2 days after atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6th, while Japan was already preparing to surrender. Russia entered the land of North Korea without any resistance from Japanese troops. The Soviets started occupy the North Korea by the 10th of August and arrived in Pyongyang a few days later. At that time, the US Army was stationed in the Philippines, 1,600 miles away from Korea. The US feared the Soviet Union's power would enter southern Korea. Historically, Russia was seeking for harbor that doesn't freeze during the winter time. The land of North Korea was always targeted for that purpose. Under the President Truman's administration, two US Army colonels, Dean Rusk and Charles Bonstein, proposed to establish the 38th parallel as the dividing line in response to the Japanese surrender on 15th of August 1945. Russia accepted the USA's dividing line proposal. That means the Soviet Union took over North Korea by joining the Allied forces for only 7 days, the end of Second World War against Japan. Because of this reason, some South Korea's students claim that the United States is responsible for the division of Korea. In 1948, the Republic of Korea and DPRK officially launched as a separate government. Just 2 years later, North Korea invaded South Korea with the total support of Stalin and Mao Zedong, Russia and China. The Korean War broke out on 25th of June 1950. In April 1950, Stalin gave Kim Il-sung permission to attack South Korea under the condition that Mao would agree to send reinforcement if needed. Mao was concerned the US would intervene, but agreed to support the North Korean invasion. Once Mao's commitment was secured, preparations for war accelerated. On January 12, 1950, yes, U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson, under the President Truman, announced the so-called Acheson Line, strengthening from the Aleutian Island to the Philippines in the Pacific. Japan and Okinawa was included, but for some reason, Korea was excluded from the U.S. line of defense. This took place at the same time Stalin and Kim were discussing the invasion of South Korea. The UN Security Council unanimously condemned the North Korean invasion to South Korea, with UN Security Council Resolution 82. 16 nations sent troops and 5 nations sent medical teams to South Korea. And many countries sent material support. The Soviet Union and China and some communist countries support North Korea. Altogether, 63 countries were involved in the Korean War at the time. In fact, the Korean War was another world war. Casualties, wounded, missing people all together totaled 5.2 million. More than 40,000 people from US Army and citizens lost their life for peace, freedom, and justice. 37,000 killed, 10,000 wounded, 4,000 missing, 5,000 prisoners of war. 1.8 million Americans served in the war. Once again, I salute from the bottom of my heart. This war cannot be called the forgotten war, and South Korea is eternally indebted toward the US and other nations. Even 26,000 Canadians served in the Korean War. The war ended on 27th of July, 1953, when the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed. The agreement created the militarized zone, DMZ, 155 miles from East Sea toward the LOC, centering on 38 parallel line. No peace treaty was ever signed. And the two Koreas are technically still at war, and 10 million families separated into North and South since 1953. Those first generations are over 80, cross 90. Many of them are dying. Actually, my aunt passed away a few months ago at the age of 90. She just separated her husband after 3 months marriage. She never been again, married again, and she was waiting and waiting until her pass. This is all multiple family connected one and the other. In 2018, the leaders of North and South Korea agreed to work toward a treaty to formally end the Korean War, but never happened. Ladies and gentlemen, as we learned from past history, the United States' role was crucial, the process of division of North and South Korea. DMZ became the most front line between the international communism and democracy beyond Korean Peninsula. October 1st, 1953, a mutual defense treaty was declared between South Korea and the USA. South Korea was number 2nd poorest country in the world until early 1960s. But nowadays, South Korea ranks number 10 in the world in terms of economic development under the US defense umbrella. Even South Korea's military strength, number 6 in the world. North Korea at 28. So likewise, America's role for peaceful reunification of two Koreas is the most significant. There is no possibility without cooperation with the United States. Let us work together. Once again, thank you for your participation. May God bless all. Thank you very much.
Very much, Dr. Yang, for your comments and for sharing your personal experience with this issue as a Korean. I would mention now that we are a little behind schedule, so our time for Q&A, question and answer, is shortened. And I'd like to begin with a question for Mr. Detrani. Joe, you have been successful in engaging representatives from China and North Korea. What is your advice on how to create ongoing dialogue from a track 2 perspective?
Well, thank you, Franco. No, I think track 2 sessions with North Korea are extremely important. They complement, ideally, the diplomatic exchanges between our respective countries. I mean, what we really want to see is, no question, we want our diplomats from the US sitting down with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pyongyang and talking about movement towards reconciliation, movement towards, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, again, President Moon Jae-in instrumental in getting President Donald Trump to meet with Kim Jong-un, with the summits, to move towards how do we get these issues resolved. So diplomats are very important, but the track 2 sessions build trust and confidence between our respective people. It permits the North Koreans to talk about issues that they may not talk about in the formal diplomatic channels. It permits the US to explain to North Korea the dynamics within not only the United States, but with Canada and our allies and partners and our concerns about their nuclear programs. I can't say enough about the track 2s and the track 1.5s, but I will say this though, very, very importantly, it's important that our formal diplomatic engagement with North Korea resume as soon as possible, aided by the track 2s and the track 1.5s.
Thank you, Mr. Detrani. Prime Minister Harper, we know that Canada is a very close friend of the United States, and there's constant exchange between the US and Canada. As a former prime minister, what would your advice be for the Biden administration concerning North Korea?
Well, that's a big topic. I think I would broadly, Franco, I would stick with the 6 points that I've recommended, obviously, to our South Korean friends. I have deep skepticism about the desire of the North Korean government for any kind of peaceful resolution. I fear that the entire legitimacy of the regime hinges on a kind of a constant, trying to generate a constant belief of a threat and a possibility of war within its boundaries. So I have some skepticism. That said, I would recommend to the Biden administration to try and engage in the kinds of dialogues that have been discussed, and to also use that dialogue to try and facilitate greater exchanges between Korean people and social society and civil society more broadly. Well, I'm not convinced of any immediate prospects for peace or harmonious relations. I think the very act of trying to engage cannot but be helpful. At least, as I say, between the Biden administration and North Korea, as long as South Korea, of course, is closely involved in those efforts. Look, I think we've got I'm probably a critic of what, if any, progress has been made over the past 27 years, but I would at least say this, that every year that goes by, and the fact that we don't have another war, we don't have actual guns firing back and forth, is a step forward. I just believe that if we're patient, if we try and engage, that in the longer term, North Korea has no purpose. You know, it serves, as I said before, it serves neither God nor humanity. It offers nothing to its people. It has no long-term goals worth achieving. And one just hopes that through engagement and dialogue and reasonableness, that at some point, for logical reasons, the will to change emerges. But I just think we need patience. And as I say, I would encourage the Biden administration to engage, but to engage cautiously and with our South Korean and other allies.
Mr. Harper, I know that Dr. Jenkins has to leave shortly for an important appointment, but is there a universal formula for creating and maintaining a successful state, which is not merely the accident of good fortune and opportunity, Dr. Jenkins? How do you see it? You're muted.
Do I see the Think Tank 2022 in that engagement? I think the key point right now is that I think, as Prime Minister Harper said, we cannot see a vision for North Korea from North Korea. It's basically self-survival, basically. And it's dominated by China. And therefore, we can't avoid dealing with China. And we can't cut off from China because it's the #1 trading partner for South Korea and Japan, and a huge trading partner for all of our nations, and developing tremendously in South America. We are very concerned how to engage. We can't ignore it. We have to engage. And that's why when Dr. Moon and her husband went to North Korea, they met Kim Il-sung. And there is an aspect there that gives some hope. And that is, there was a very clear rejection of the ideology of Juche ideology and communism in their meeting. But at the same time, there was a very strong cultural affinity for a unified Korea. And that's, I think, a driving force that can be tapped into, because since that time, the North Korea has always kept a very good open relationship with Dr. Moon and the movement, even allowing the movement to build a hotel in Pyongyang, to build a peace center there, and also to ongoing exchange with Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and also Kim Jong-un. So I see that can't be underestimated. I think what Ambassador Dutrani does and Honorable Fonseca and dialogue is critical. It's critical because they are human beings and they can be touched. And we saw that. We are skeptical, but actually no engagement definitely means it will go the way that we don't want it to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Honorable Fonseca, I hope that your internet connection has been revived. In your view, how can countries in the Western Hemisphere, here we are as a group of people from the Americas, how can a group of experts best reach out to North Korea to join the community of nations as a free and prosperous society, in your view?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope my internet's working better now. Well, regarding your question, I believe that it's very important to try to focus on the future. Again, if we're looking back, it will be very hard to find light in that heat. So it's important to try to understand that what is in the past, it's in the past. Now we need to have a vision of a new Korea and try to focus in how to build that as a community. Try to understand that a well-being economy for all Koreans should and could be the driver. To try to understand that if we build some guidelines to show us the way in the discussions, that will be easier. And again, not to go to the rear view effect. It's not bad to look time to time to the past, but it's very important that we focus our energy in the present in order to build a better future and to understand that we are all different and to respect that and try to understand that we are dealing with lives, with families, with human beings. And they are in this condition not because they choose to, they are just there. So we need to see it as a way to help them to get to a better situation, a unified Korea for all of them.
Thank you, Honorable Fonseca. We have a lot of questions in the chat, and I wish I could get to all of them. I'd like to ask Dr. Yang, as a native of Korea, how you see it. What's the best thing that Western countries in the Americas can do at this point in time to help move this effort forward toward the peaceful reunification of Korea? And especially as you've been there many times and spoken with people in North Korea.
Yeah, I think as we understand, USA is the best ally of South Korea. As I addressed, without USA, without support from America, there's no way to, approach to the north. So under that secure umbrella, somehow we need to start work. So I would suggest, as Ambassador Titoroni read the several years for six-way talk. So the fundamentally need under support USA and China understanding, this dialogue of six-way talk should revive again to make peaceful advance toward reunification of Korean Peninsula. That America's role is crucial because of although North Korea has great peer toward America, but America, without America's support and the structure internationally surrounded all Korean Peninsula, even North Korea can survive by themselves. So in that sense, I think the big giant nations, especially America and China, should develop their own relationship to support to Korea's reunification.
Dr. Yang, we have time for one or two more questions. I'd like to ask this question to both Mr. Harper and Mr. Detrani. Trade with China and investments from all the Americas, as well as China being a major trading partner of South Korea, Japan, and the United States. What can be done to gain more cooperation from China to emphasize denuclearization of North Korea? Mr. Detrani, you first.
Well, I think China is committed to denuclearization of North Korea. We saw that in the six-party talks where China hosted the six parties and chaired the final session when we did have a joint statement in September of 2005. It's not in China's interest to have a nuclear North Korea. The possibility of instability in the region, the possibility of a loose nuke, the possibility of conflict, and the possibility, if indeed there is conflict or instability, the migration issue, the number of North Koreans that will be going into China because of the border with China would be immense. So from China's optic, North Korea having nuclear weapons, retaining nuclear weapons is not in their interest. So I think China has been, and I think it will continue to be amenable to working with the United States and South Korea and others, certainly those of Japan and Russia, but indeed our allies and partners in trying to resolve the issue. But again, China's interest is also important in regards to keeping North Korea as the buffer. I think we have to be realistic in this regard. We have over 28,000 troops in South Korea. We have extended nuclear deterrence commitments to South Korea and to Japan. So I think the first issue would be denuclearization, and I think China's on board with all that. And I think when we go from that to a possible confederation and reunification, I think that's when a dialogue with the United States and South Korea would be very important as to the US role in the region, where we would be, and assurances to China that, that their security is important and no one is going to impinge on their security. As we saw with THAAD, the deployment of our missile defense system, when China accused or said the United States was using that to look at China rather than North Korea, which indeed is not true. So there are issues there with China that require greater diplomacy, a greater dialogue. But I think the issue of denuclearization of North Korea is clear. China is on board with accomplishing that mission.
Thank you. Mr. Harper?
Yeah, Franco, as I think I've said before, well, I don't subscribe to the pure theory of North Korea as a simple puppet state of China. I also tend to resist the belief that China is a kind of an innocent bystander in all of this. I guess I agree with the ambassador that a nuclear-armed Korea is not in the Chinese interest. On the other hand, I would say this, that if those nukes were ever pointed at Beijing, this crisis would be resolved in 15 minutes. I don't think we should be under any illusion about the fact that China really is the long-term lifeline of this regime. And I think we have to be frank with the Chinese in our assessment of that. You know, I saw in the chat, somebody raised the question of, you know, in terms of reunification of the Koreas, is the reunification of Germany any model? I'm not going to say that it necessarily is, but let's be clear about how Germany got reunified. Germany got reunified because the Soviet Union, through combination of weakness of will and increasing weakness of power, essentially stopped backing the East German regime. And then the East German people made it clear they wanted reunification with the West. I have little doubt that the underlying dynamic here is the same. I have little doubt that the Korean people want to be reunified on both sides of the border. And I have little doubt that if given a choice, they would choose the South Korean model of governance, not the North Korean model of governance. So yes, you know, we have to engage China, and we have to understand that China, you know, has a lot of clout in this regard. But as I say, I think we should put the pressure on them. Now, you know, you asked a question in there, Franco, about trade. I think that's a very big question, and you know, I've been advocating for some time that we have to change our trade relations in a way that lessens our dependence on China and frankly increases or takes advantage of the dependence they have on our trade. But that's a whole broader topic. But as I say, let's put a little bit of pressure on China on this subject.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Thank you, Mr. Detrani, Honorable Fonseca, Dr. Young, and all our participants today. It's been a tremendously informative session, and I thank you all for your contributions today. We have been gathered here with a group of very knowledgeable, very experienced people in the field of governance, diplomacy, and trade, and I hope and pray that we will find the resolution that we're looking for in the not too distant future. This concludes our session of the International Summit Council for Peace. We will continue with the next session at 2 p.m. New York time, which will engage the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, which will be led by Dr. Simão Peraboli from Brazil. And there will be representation from North and South America on that panel. I thank you all. May you have a wonderful day. Muchas gracias, merci, obrigado, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Dr.
Harper. Thank
Thank you.
you,
Thank you.
Ambassador Detrani. Thank you, Honorable Fonseca.
Thank you.
I hope
Franco.
it was as good a session as it was for me.
It was excellent, Franco. Thank you.
Yeah.
Franco, you did
Great.
it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish you a wonderful day. And if you're having lunch, bon appetit.
Bon appetit. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Bye.